Tim, can you start muting people that aren't muting? If you go into the screen with your cursor, you'll find a little mic in the round circle on your far left. If you hit that, that'll mute you, and you hit it again to unmute, and you can do that to talk. Okay? In the meantime, we're trying to cut down all background noise. We also have two representatives joining us, Representative Andrew Bolden and Representative Nancy Murphy. I don't know if I see Nancy on the call and yes list as yet. We also have two members of the press corps, Annie Rook from NHPR and Robert Michael from the Caledonian Record. And last I counted, there was 19 interested parties of the public. A few of the ground rules for this meeting. Be polite and respectful to each other. We're all kind of trying to do the same thing, do the right thing. If you're not talking, again, mute your line. But if you need help muting, Tim Drew will be able to mute it. We have received 25 questions from Representative Bolden. Thank you for providing those in advance. As with any other question that's posed to the department, we're a very transparent agency. We're a public agency that work for the people of the state of New Hampshire. We follow our statutes and rules in everything that we do. We can answer most of those questions that are based on facts or are final determinations made by the agency that are part of the public record. What we're not able to do, however, is answer questions that are judgment in nature, where decisions are in progress and haven't been finalized. In ongoing questions that might involve an ongoing enforcement action, just like the police say, we have no comment because we haven't made a decision yet. Or about any permit that has not been received. So those are three areas that kind of border how we're going to respond to your questions. So with that, Representative Bolden, you called for this meeting. I'll turn it over to you to introduce who you'd like to do, and we can start going through your questions.
Sure, thanks so much. So the residents of Dalton and surrounding communities asked me to organize this meeting. The questions on our agenda are kind of an amalgamation of concerns from the interested parties that are with us today. So I didn't have any people prepared to speak or anything. I just gave you guys a list of questions, and you guys can run through them and answer the ones that hopefully answer them all, but obviously some of them you've indicated that might be outside the scope of what you're able to speak to. So if you guys just want to take it from here and present what you have as far as answers to what we've put together in the agenda, that'd be great.
Okay, Mike, is my screen showing?
Yeah, I see you. No, your screen? No, you mean screen sharing?
Yeah.
No, not at present. At least that's not what I'm seeing. I'm just seeing a mosaic of all the participants. And while you're, and there we go. So yeah, if you scroll down, John, I think the questions are there. Oh, there you go. Now we got them.
Okay, I'm on one screen, not two, so.
Yeah, no, you got it. And one thing I realized, John, I think we missed introducing Rainey.
Oh yeah.
Rainey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rainey Pelletier. I'm the Assistant Director of the Water Division, which oversees all of the land resource-based programs, septic systems, wetlands, alteration of terrain, anything to do with the disturbance of land and development activities taking place on land.
Thank you. And so for ease of, I guess, going through these questions, this is Mike Wimsatt speaking. I'll go ahead and do these questions. We're going to, go to Rainey in some cases, or the Air Division, or Pam Hoyt-Dennison here in the Waste Division with me for certain questions. The first question, how many meetings have been held, and are there any discussions, notes, materials to share? And these questions are organized between the two projects. So the first project we'll talk about is Dalton. And I guess I would just preface things by saying we do not currently have an application in hand, either for wetlands or alteration of terrain or solid waste permit for this project. This is a proposed project that Casella Waste Services has proposed, and there have been a couple of meetings that were requested by Casella to introduce the project to the agency. And actually, most of the activity on that has been related to what would be something like that related to alteration of terrain and our wetlands program. So, Rainey, do you have any information to provide in relation to that question?
I think the major, and I think John Swan had seen the PowerPoints that were done. We had staff involvement basically at a meeting has been with the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA, and there is a PowerPoint, I believe, that Tim Drew had sent out that went over the proposed Dalton project. But other than that, there's been minimal interaction. My understanding is that we may see an application for both alteration of terrain and wetlands sometime the first part of August. But right now we have seen no applications in either of the programs, wetlands or alteration of terrain.
Okay, that's helpful. And as a general response to the question about the notes materials to share, to the extent when meetings like that are held, it's common for them just to be presentations and conversations between a proposed applicant and the agency. Oftentimes there aren't any minutes taken. So I don't honestly know whether there's much of anything other than the PowerPoint presentations that Casella provided at those were, no confidential business assertion was made at the time. So I believe those are public and are available through, a request to the agency under RSA 91A. And certainly if any requests like that are made, we'll respond to them appropriately. I think what Rainey said just now, I guess, gives you the best answer we can give you to question 2, which is regarding, whether a project timeline is established yet. We don't have any applications, so there is no project timeline as far as we're concerned, and there's no project until we get an application in there. The third question is Dalton zoning application timeline and the overall process to satisfy local ordinances. And, I'm not sure what the question is. I will share with you that, there's a fair amount of case law, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not an attorney, so you shouldn't take my legal, I'm going to avoid making any legal representations to you, but what I will share with you is that my understanding of the way that law surrounding solid waste facilities in New Hampshire works is that the state of New Hampshire has primacy with respect to, how a facility is sited, designed, and operated under state law. However, the courts have held very specifically in a couple of cases in the case law that a community has the right to determine through properly enacted zoning where a solid waste facility may be located in a community. We, as the state permitting authority, don't really get engaged in that. That's a separate matter between the town and its ordinances and an applicant. But certainly, like I say, there's a lot of information out there available about how the courts have determined that towns do have the right through locally enacted, appropriately enacted zoning to determine where in their town is a zone where a solid waste facility could be. The fourth question talks about a right-of-way for this facility being in Bethlehem and asks whether their zoning ordinances need to be satisfied and who ensures. We don't have an application for this, so I don't really know what that's going to look like. We don't know what the footprint would be or how that's going to be organized. Wouldn't really be appropriate for us to try to at this point, other than to say, to the extent that the law and the rules in New Hampshire require that a facility be located in a place that it's properly zoned or lawfully zoned to be located, we would look at that in reviewing the application. But again, that's a somewhat arm's length transaction as far as we're concerned. We expect that when an applicant comes to us, that they have the right to site the facility through local zoning, and then we take it from there. So I'm not really sure how to answer that in the context of an application that doesn't exist yet. Question 5 is regarding, I guess, DOT, I assume means Department of Transportation. When would an impact study be performed and by whom? I'm assuming that's a question about traffic. And Pam, if I know you've joined us on the line, can you give any, we don't have anything to say specifically about an application we don't have in hand, but can you speak generally to how traffic issues might or might not be addressed during a solid waste permit application? Pam, are you with us?
I am. I just unmuted and I apologize in advance. My audio connection is pretty fragile today. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, you sound great.
Yeah. But others
Are you able to
could mute would be helpful.
Okay. Okay. We review a solid waste permit application kind of from the driveway forward. There's a requirement that obviously there be safe entrance and exit from the facility, but we do not have the DES and solid waste management program through the solid waste management rules have no jurisdiction over traffic on public roads. So we don't look at that per se, but the applicant is obligated to get all requisite local, state, and approvals, and federal approvals for that matter, relative to the facility, independent of the solid waste permit. So to the extent that there's a driveway permit required, or a DOT might, in some cases, might require a traffic light or realignment of the road for safety reasons, that would be a responsibility of the applicants, but not through our program.
Thank you, Pam. That's very helpful. And a question has come in here from Mr. Fred Anderson on it, and the question is: does the township, under its zoning ordinances, have the authority to deny placing a landfill within its borders? And I'll be honest, Mr. Anderson, thank you for that question. I do not know the answer to that. That I think is a legal question that others may be qualified to answer, but I'm not qualified to answer that, so I don't know the answer. The 6th question reads as follows: Whitefield will be greatly impacted by this project and is an abutting town. How much of an impact will opposition from neighboring towns have on this project? And parenthetically, Whitefield and Sugar Hill publicly oppose this. So what I can tell you is that it's very clear in the solid waste statute and the rules that the agency for application for a solid waste permit for a landfill or other solid waste facility needs to hold in the case of the public benefit requirement, needs to hold that hearing in the town that is the host town for the facility, and take comment from members of the public and communities regarding how that facility might or might not provide a public benefit, and to take comment generally on the facility and on the proposition. And certainly, if we are to receive a permit application from Casella for this proposed facility in Dalton, that would then result in a series of things happening. We review the application, determine if it were complete and administratively complete, and then begin our technical review. And as part of that process, we would announce and schedule a public hearing in order to take public testimony and comment on that. And that testimony can be oral testimony in a hearing, or it could be written testimony submitted at the hearing or during the comment period that we would open up. And typically we'd open up the comment period from the time of announcement of the public hearing through to a given date following the public hearing. So it gives the public ample opportunity to provide written comment. And certainly any communities who supported or were opposed to the facility or wherever their position might be would be both free and would be encouraged to submit whatever appropriate comment they would like to make on the project. And our job is to evaluate that comment in the context of the rules and the statutes that govern how we make our permitting decisions and give it due consideration in making that decision. And that's what we would do. That's what we do in all cases, and that's what we would do if we get an application for a project in Dalton.
Hey, Mike.
Questions?
Mike, this is Greg from the Air Division. I just want to echo what you said with respect to an air permit. Everything you just described about the process is very similar to the air side. To the extent the facility requires a permit, we would follow that same procedure you basically outlined. The only difference being is we are not required to hold the hearing if requested in the locality. However, under the statute, we're not required to do that under the statute, but under our policies, we do hold the hearing in the community under our policies. So just that one little clarification on the air side.
Craig, and certainly any of my colleagues in DES, please feel free to interject if there's something I'm leaving out or you want to contribute from your program. The seventh question is states that Dalton sends its waste to the Mount Carberry landfill, not NCES. And for those who aren't familiar with all the terminology, the Mount Carberry landfill is the landfill operated by the Androscoggin Valley Regional Refuse Disposal District, which is a district that comprises around, I forget how many, 7 to 9, 10, maybe 11 towns in the North Country. It is a facility that is operated for the benefit of the district, but also operates as a commercial facility and takes waste from anywhere. And then NCES is the abbreviation for the landfill that Casella operates in Bethlehem under the company North Country Environmental Services. So that's what NCES stands for. So the question is, does it matter if Dalton does not utilize Casella's services? And I think the answer is that when we receive an application for a solid waste landfill, we are required, among many other things, the technical review that we perform to make sure that it would be designed to operate, constructed, operated in compliance with the rules. We're also required to determine whether that facility would provide a public benefit. And there's a very specific description of what that means in the statute. So we would review that, and certainly the services that a facility provides both locally, regionally, and statewide are all relevant to that determination. So we would look at that. We would look at that in that information in aggregate to determine whether we believe under the statute the facility would provide a substantial public benefit to the people of the state, and that's how we would make our determination. And that's that I can do to answer that question. Question 8, if language from House Bill 1319, and there was a copy of that attached to the email Representative Bolden sent to us, is passed into law next section, would a Dalton permit be considered grandfathered? Again, I believe House Bill 1319 was a bill that established a setback for siting of landfills near state parks and other special features. And I simply don't know the answer. That's a parliamentary question that I don't think I'm qualified to answer, and so I won't try to answer it. Question 9 is, given the DES mission to help sustain a high quality of life for all citizens, protecting and restoring the environment and public health in New Hampshire, how can DES help us relative to our desire to protect our natural environment and resources, as well as way of life, from a predictable outcome emanating from the permitting of a 500-acre landfill development that history serves to confirm will happen to us? I guess the only way I can answer that question is that we do not have an application in place that's been submitted at this time. If and when we do receive an application, we will review that application consistent with the statute and the rules that govern the design, siting, and construction and operation of landfills. And we will evaluate that application and would not approve it unless it demonstrated that the facility could be sited, designed, constructed, and operated in compliance with the rules and the statute. Question 10, will the landfill be forced on a town and a region that strongly oppose it? Considering the experience of the region already with NCES and Bethlehem, how is it fair to target the same area again for further landfilling? 1,900 acres, 100 acres would be if this were permitted in Dalton. If a new landfill is necessary, why must it be the North Country that has already endured destruction and divisiveness of the Bethlehem facility? And again, I guess that's a question that I would have to answer the same way that I answered question 9. If we application as a permitting authority, we have a duty to review and make a decision relative to permit applications that are duly submitted to the agency. We will do that, and we will review it in the context of the underlying statute and the rules. Question 11, how do you feel about permitting a massive landfill and wilderness in a prime wildlife habitat adjacent to a beautiful state park, a lake that will be ruined by fecal material long before potential water pollution and air that will make the area disgusting for state park users and residents for miles around? Again, the answer to that is that if we receive an application, we'll review it consistent with the statute and the rules and make a decision consistent with those rules. Question 12, will any consideration be given to the fact that the Division of Parks and Recreation is generally concerned about capacity and is looking to establish more state parks as is? If this landfill goes in, it's likely they would lose Forest Lake State Park. I think the answer to that is that if an application is submitted, we will institute the process, which includes a public comment period and an opportunity to provide comment. And to the extent that the Division of Parks were to provide comment and testimony, that comment and testimony would be given due consideration consistent with rules and procedures. Question 13, DES is admittedly over budgeted and understaffed. Under budgeted and understaffed. How can we expect DES to properly oversee its new development adequately? And I guess the way I can answer that is that we are a state agency that as many state agencies do, we do have funding and staffing challenges. We have it's not a secret to people on this call that we have right now we're in a situation where we have a number of vacancies in our Solid Waste Management Bureau that we have not filled yet, and we do hope to fill those. And certainly when we have vacancies, it's more difficult for us to do our work. But I can see that we place landfills and their operation high on the list of priorities for the work that we do and the staff that we have working. And we do our very, very best to ensure that they are operated safely and in compliance with their permits and the law. Question 14, the current owner of the land, Doug Ingerson Jr., has had repeated violations for altering terrain without necessary permitting. He still owns the right-of-way needed to access the development. Will his background be examined as well? And what I tell you, again, we do not have an application for this, so we don't know if there is an application submitted. We don't know what it will look like. We don't know what the footprint will be. We don't know what the land ownership scenario will be. It is the case that a facility is expected under the rules to be owned by the applicant. We will look at whatever application we get, and we will interpret it and determine its compliance consistent with the rules that are applicable and make a determination at that time. But again, we don't have an application, so it's really not, it wouldn't be helpful for me to sort of
Sure it would.
speculate what that might look like and how we might deal with that.
Sure it would.
Question 15, landfilling is at the bottom of the solid waste hierarchy, and the solid waste plan has not been updated nor really followed since 2003. Do you feel another, thanks John, where'd we go? Do you feel another landfill is necessary given the capacity we have and the necessity of addressing waste with systems that do not rely heavily on land? Should we not be aiming for developing regional, municipal, county waste management facilities where there is local control, accountability, etc., as the alternative to commercial dominance of the industry in New Hampshire, as suggested by the study committee on waste and recycling last fall? So, I guess the best way to answer that question is that anyone who's been paying attention to the ongoing dialogue on solid waste knows that we have a lot of work to do on solid waste policy in New Hampshire with respect to how we legislature's goals of really providing for an integrated system of solid waste management. I think folks have heard me say when testifying before the legislature or answering questions that we would absolutely like to see a more integrated. Right now, we do rely very heavily on landfilling, which is at the bottom of the hierarchy. We would absolutely like to see an integrated system of waste management that emphasizes waste reduction, waste recycling, composting, waste to energy, all of the other technologies that are higher up on the hierarchy than landfilling. The agency's ability to steer that is somewhat limited because we are not an agency that proposes and cites facilities. We're a permitting authority, and we receive applications that come to us from the private sector in most cases, or from municipalities, and we react to those. We're duty bound to review them in the context of the rules and the law underlying it, and we do the very best we can to apply those law and rules fairly and appropriately, make appropriate decisions on whether those facilities get permits, or if they do get permits, what conditions apply to those permits. So I think that's probably the best way for me to answer that question. The next question is, with the existence of Carberry in the north and Turnpike in the south, and the fact that both facilities have ample room for decades of New Hampshire waste, how can ES justify the need for another landfill, especially considering the March 2020 permit denial for NCES as not meeting public benefit? Carberry's state expansion would extend its life out for decades and thus eliminate the public benefit of both a state's expansion and NCES and a new landfill in Dalton. So I think the best way to answer that is that the public criteria in the statute gives us pretty clear guidance on how to determine whether a certain facility applying for a permit meets a substantial public benefit to the people of the state. And in all cases, that's what we do. When we get an application for expansion of such a facility or siting of a new facility, our job is to apply that criteria, take public comment, gather information, take the applicants' showing, and they're required to provide in their application an argument for why the facility would provide how the facility would provide a public benefit. Review all that information and make a decision about whether the facility does provide a public benefit. And when we do that, we have to do that on a 20-year planning period. We do that with respect to when we're trying to figure out whether there's a capacity need, which is a component of that determination. We look during that 20-year planning period and determine whether there's a capacity need for technologies, including the disposal, to manage waste during that time period. And if that, and basically for that component of the determination, if we find that the facility will fulfill, first of all, a capacity need needs to exist during that time period. and then that facility would need to provide, at least in part, a means of addressing that capacity need. So that's, I guess, the best way that we can answer that question. Question 17 is, we've seen polluted wetlands and wells, air quality and home life impacts of area residents up to 6 miles distant from NCES. Do you agree that the technology available today is not adequate to contain leachate in perpetuity? If not, what are the ethics of permitting these facilities as they are built today and inflicting the consequences of their failure on the surrounding communities and environment? In quotes, landfills leak is what we have consistently heard. Can you guarantee that the technology being utilized will not leak? So there's a lot to sort of unpack in that question. I think that to take the last question first, we have responded to this question a number of times, and I think the best way to answer it is, and it's how we've answered it in the past a number of times, is that the landfill design criteria in New Hampshire call for basically a double-line landfill with a leachate collection system. And that has been proven to be a rather effective way of managing waste. Nobody can ever guarantee that no leak will ever occur, and those who follow this know that in some cases, not necessarily because the liner is leaking, but because of other events that occur. Sometimes leachate is released at facilities, either in transfer from a leachate collection tank to a truck for offsite disposal, or through some kind of a defect or a plumbing problem. And when we've identified those problems, we've required those facilities to run it to ground, find out what the problem is, and to fix it. The good news is that in the case of the facilities with those engineered systems in place, while we have had some, we've not had liner leaks. What we have had in some cases are these other kinds of events that have occurred. When that occurs, we're able to address it, and it doesn't end up, we don't have a situation where the groundwater beyond the facility gets impacted above drinking water standards. We have had some circumstances where release has resulted in a need to go into more intensive monitoring and to try to identify a problem. A problem like that happened with a plumbing situation. Plumbing is a rough way to describe it. It was a liner leak, but it was related to a cap and a swale associated with a portion of the landfill in Bethlehem a number of years ago. And the monitoring system detected that. And then when the company went to figure out what it was, they were able to find out what the problem was, go back in and fix it. And it did not result in groundwater being impacted above drinking water standards. It was simply that the contaminants were detected. So basically, we've been able to address those things from an operational standpoint. With regard to liners, basically what we can say pretty confidently based on what our past experience has been is that to the extent that a liner leaks, it is unlikely to leak at a level that's going to cause an adverse impact on groundwater. So no, nobody can guarantee that no one molecule of material will get through a liner. The more relevant, whether or not, if there is a leak, does that leak have an adverse impact on groundwater quality in the area downgrading the land? That's a long answer to that question. As far as early parts of the question, I just want to look at that. I guess I probably addressed that. So then question 18 is, does Casella reputation for violations, deception, lawsuits influence the PDS decision whether to continue working with this company? So every landfill applicant every applicant for a solid waste permit that comes to the agency is required to undergo a background check. They have to provide information about their company's compliance history, their operating officers' individual records, and that information is provided to the Department of Justice, They review that information. And so that review is done as part of every landfill permit application process, and we review that material in making a decision. Now, it's important to understand, it doesn't mean that if there are any examples of non-compliance or cases against the company, that the company is automatically excluded. What the language and the rules say is that we need to determine if we're going to issue a permit approval, that the applicant has the necessary, and I'm not going to get the quotation right. Pam Lloyd Dennison has this memorized. Pam, can you give me that? Tell me what the rules say on that again, the actual language.
I think you're referring to the provision in the statute that specifies that an applicant, that the agency reviews the background of an applicant to determine sufficient reliability, integrity, competence, and expertise to operate a facility in New Hampshire. And I may have those out of sequence, but those are the four. Integrity, competence, expertise, and reliability.
Huh. Thanks, Pam. That's really helpful. And then question 19, what exactly would DES consider in an applicant's background to be a disqualifier relative to permitting for an expansion or a new landfill? See attached Excel spreadsheet that is far from complete but illustrates a long and continued pattern of litigious behavior, bullying, worker deaths, environmental violations, etc. They have current lawsuits in New York, 2, New Hampshire, 2, and have been proven to be working around the laws in Maine relative to out-of-state waste and the reprocessing of that waste in Lewiston in order to claim it is internally generated waste. This is not a business partner we want or need in Dalton. And it's not a question that I'm prepared to answer. I can tell you that we will, if we, with regard to Dalton, if we get an application for the facility, there will be a background check that will be information. To the extent that folks have compiled information that they want to ensure that the agency has access to during the public comment and the public comment period, I would encourage folks to, if they want to do that, to submit that information as written public comments so that the agency has access for their review of the permit application and the background check that's associated with it. And I think
Michael, sorry to interrupt. I have a quick question for you regarding number 18. What is the number
sorry,
of
who's this?
This is Stephen Walker.
Hi.
Just a question about number 18. What is the number of violations that that DES considers too much, too many, that they won't allow that company to do business?
Yeah, Stephen, I don't think there's a number, and that's, as you can imagine, it's very difficult. A question like that. What we have to do is look at the rules and what the citation that Pam just read, and look at the information in the record in toto, and determine we have to make a determination that the company either possesses those qualities or doesn't sufficient to safely and appropriately operate a solid waste facility. I can't give you a number.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question. So that concludes the 19 questions that were submitted with respect to Dalton. And I guess there are about 6 more that were submitted relative to Bethlehem. So I guess I'd like to read those at this point and go through those. So,
Mike, there's a couple of questions on the chat. One from
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah, one from Nancy Morrison and one from John Swan.
Okay, let me read those. So, from Nancy Morrison, do you consider the Bethlehem site a successful end result of the DES permitting process? I'm not sure how I would answer that. That calls for a judgment call that I don't think it's appropriate for me to opine on.
That would be a no comment.
And then the question from John Swan is, how many years has this double liner technology existed to date? So your summary is based on how many years of data. We really do not know what the future will hold as they continue to build on airspace. So line systems have been in place for several decades. They're most in the later years constructed of high-density polyethylene, which has, been estimated to. There's a range of estimates. Some range estimates is that the thickness and quality of the HDPE liners being used may last as much as a couple hundred years. There's others that are much shorter than that. What I think is important to understand is that the operation of a landfill has a limited time, and then when it's closed, it gets capped, and the introduction of precipitation or liquids from waste that were filled in it come to an end, basically, and you limit the infiltration and precipitation to that. So what we see, particularly with today's landfill technology, is that unless there's actually recirculation of leachate, which is a technology that can be used in certain circumstances, some of these landfills end up experiencing what's called a dry tomb effect, which is that they were buttoned up, they had whatever amount of liquid was in them at the time of their closure. They get a cap over it that significantly limits any infiltration and precipitation. And as a result, the waste mass actually dries up, if you will, and leachate generation, and we've seen this with other closed facilities, significantly declines in later years. So the actual generation of leachate, heads towards negligible quantities during closure. That is a frustration for some landfill companies that are also trying to extract methane gas for production of power, because they put in gas collection systems, which are very much needed during the operational phase in the early closure years. But then later, as leachate production goes down and degradation in the landfill substantially declines, they don't get that gas generation. So it's different for different facilities. It's different depending on how the facility is being managed. I guess that's probably the best way that I could answer that. And then I see a follow-up question from Nancy Morrison. Financially, what does the state of New Hampshire gain by permitting a private landfill? And I don't know the answer to that. That's not an analysis that is part of our charge under the law and rules that govern our permitting authorities. So I don't really have an answer for that. So if we move on to the questions about Bethlehem and Nces, and so of course there's a distinction now, because when I talked, previously we were answering questions relative to Dalton. We don't have an application in for Dalton, but we do have actually a pending application for expansion of the Bethlehem landfill that is pending right now, and we recently deemed that application complete, administratively complete, and I think you will very likely be seeing a notice in the coming week or so of a public hearing that will be held in late August, and that hearing will be primarily because we want to make sure people are safe. We're going to encourage people to participate virtually, much as you are all doing today on this call. But we will also hold there will be an in-person hearing. There will be a location in Bethlehem where we will hold a hearing where people who are, for whatever reason, are unable to participate virtually can come, and observing obviously appropriate social distancing and COVID-19 precautions, provide oral testimony. So we'll be doing that. Again, we'll be encouraging everyone, if possible, to participate virtually, but we will have a physical location in Bethlehem where that can be done. So I would encourage all of you, obviously you're spending time on a summer afternoon here on this because you're concerned about one or more of these facilities or these projects. So to the extent that you have testimony you'd like to provide, we would encourage you to participate virtually and provide that oral testimony. And similarly, if you would like to provide written testimony, we'll be able to do that really from the point of the notice going out through to a period probably a week or so following the public hearing. So I would very strongly encourage you. That's the very best way for you to get your voices heard in this process. I do want to tell you, we're listening to what we are discussing and what we'll hear from you today, and that's important. But I do want to emphasize that what you say or write today during this call is not going to become an official part of the public record with respect to this application. So if you want to ensure that your testimony, whether oral or written, gets entered into the record, participate in the hearing, or submit written comments during the comment period. And the notes that will be on our website and also published in a local paper will absolutely provide you the appropriate guidance so that you know how to get your comment in, whether it's through the public hearing or through the submittal of written testimony. So I strongly encourage you to do that. So we have about 6 questions here that were also provided with Bethlehem. And so the first one is references a notice of findings that I issued, that the agency issued under my signature to Casella, to North Country Environmental Services on October 19th. And the question is NCES overcapacity? And so that, for those who are not familiar with that, we do as a routine part of our compliance monitoring for landfills, we do keep an eye on their fill rates and, what, in the context of those fill rates, whether they are going to meet their permit requirement. When we permit a facility, we're basically permitting airspace. We require the facility as part of our permit approvals to operate until a certain date, providing, non-token capacity for solid waste disposal through the date that permit is issued for. And when we looked at the data that we were getting from NCES, we became a little concerned that perhaps their fill rate was too fast and that they might not be operating the facility and have adequate capacity through the end date, which is April of 2021 for their current approved permit. And so that is a matter of public record. That notice of finding is on our website or on our, and you can get it through One Stop. And so we asked them up to answer those questions. They did provide a response to us. They articulated a difference of opinion with the agency about what date they were required to operate to. But having stated that in their letter, they confirmed that they would be able to provide operations and non-capacity for disposal through the April 2021 period. So we continue to monitor the information that they've submitted to us in that regard. This is an ongoing compliance monitoring activity, and so I'm not going to be in a position to tell you where DES is at on it, because it's something that we're in real-time monitoring at this time, and we will continue to monitor it to ensure that the facility can operate as it's required through the April 2021 timeframe. There's a second question here that's related to that. I think Mr. Swan has referenced a survey that was referenced in NCS's responses and reports to the agency about how they determine whether or not, what their fill rate is, what their remaining capacity is, and whether they'll be able to meet that. They are not required to submit that survey to us. We can request it if we wish to, and we may well. If we do request it and it is submitted, then it would be absolutely available as a public document. It would be available to the public to view at that time. So that's, again, understand that this is an ongoing compliance monitoring activity. It would not be appropriate for me to be discussing where we're at on this at this point. Question 22, stage 3 issues with liner. Since April 2019 accident with a boot, in quotes, the facility has reported over threshold limits of leachate in the liner. Is this a problem? Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Pam Hoyt-Dennison to talk about this particular question. Pam?
Thank you. Yeah, we are aware of the damage to the boot and the subsequent repair and the flow rate data in the secondary collection system. And of course, we're keeping an eye on that data and the situation. The flow rate in the secondary system is just one of many lines of evidence used to monitor the performance of the liner system. And to date, those flow rates remain above what we refer to as the reporting threshold, which is 25 gallons per acre per day average over a rolling 30-day period. But my most current information is that the rates have not exceeded what we refer to as the action threshold, which is 100 gallons per acre per day averaged over a rolling 30-day period. So again, we're keeping an eye on the data and we'll respond accordingly to the analysis of that data as it unfolds. But right now, they are not reporting information that triggers an investigation today.
Thank you, Pam. And then the question 23 is as follows: landfill leachate, 8 million gallons sent to Franklin / Concord. Has DES thought about the implication of 6 more years of 8 million gallons per year, plus more of this? PFAS is becoming a bigger issue. So for those who don't know what this references, a routine part of how a line landfill operates is that it has as I said earlier, it has a double liner, and the predominant, the lion's share of leachate generated by the facility, and that's basically the liquid that percolates down through the waste and then gets to the bottom of the first liner. There are engineered systems in place on the bottom of that first liner that collect that leachate, get it off the liner, get it into holding tanks, and then the routine way of managing that is that for landfill is that leachate is pumped off to trucks, to tanker trucks, and those trucks transport the leachate to wastewater treatment facilities that treat the leachate, part of their influent to their wastewater treatment plant. I know that Mr. Swan has had quite a lot of interactions with Tom O'Donovan, our director of our water division, and Sharon McMillan, runs the Winnipes River Basin Bureau wastewater treatment plant. And for those who don't know, New Hampshire state government is a little unusual compared to most state governments in that we actually, as part of DES, we run a wastewater treatment plant that serves several Lakes region communities. Back in the 60s and 70s, those communities were having adverse impact on the lakes in the region, and so their wastewater sewer systems were installed, and their wastewater was all plumbed to a state-operated wastewater treatment facility located in Franklin. And Sharon McMillan currently is the superintendent that operates that, in charge of that facility. And Sharon and our director, Tom O'Donovan, spent, I think, a fair amount of time talking to John Swan about this. And actually, John, you also toured the plant from them as well. That, I think, is what John's talking about here, is that both the Concord wastewater treatment facility, which is a facility operated by the city of Concord, and this Franklin facility operated by DES do take in truckloads of this leachate from the NCES facility for treatment and disposal. And that is an issue that is not unique to just this facility. The turnkey landfill in Rochester generates leachate and trucks that to send some of it to the Rochester wastewater treatment plant, other wastewater treatment plant. Now the reference to PFAS in here, I guess we're getting to a point where maybe everybody knows what that stands for, but I'll say it anyways. PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkylated substances. That's too long of a word, so we just say PFAS. Those are perfluorochemicals, chemicals that have fluorine in them, that, created a tremendous groundwater contamination problem in southern New Hampshire, impacting several southern New Hampshire communities as a result of air emissions that occurred from the St. Gobain facility in Merrimack and the TCI facility in Amherst. And there were literally square miles of aquifer that have been impacted by those facilities, where the emitted compounds fell out on the ground leach down through the soil and into groundwater and impact the drinking water supplies. And since 2016, DES has been really working feverishly and working on many different fronts to address the PFAS problem in southern New Hampshire, and also to investigate it at other facilities in the state. We have sampled thousands of wells in the state at this point, identified PFAS contamination in many wells. So it's a problem that is absolutely, I would not disagree at all that PFAS is becoming a bigger issue. It's been a really big issue for us for at least 4 years now, and 2 years prior to that, many of you may remember that the Haven well supply at the Peace Trade Port was impacted by a PFAS compound called PFOS, or perfluorooctane sulfonate, that's associated with firefighting foam that was used on the base and released. And that was a supply well that provided drinking water to the whole base. That well was taken offline immediately back in 2014. And the Air Force, working with EPA and DES, has been working hard to address the significant groundwater contamination at that site. So suffice to say, PFAS is a huge issue for us. We worked very hard to identify where we find it. One of the places we looked for it, because we had read information that suggested we would find it, is in landfill leachate. And we did conduct sampling at a number of our line landfill facilities. And really, almost without exception, we found that the leachate does contain, in some cases, significant concentrations of PFAS. Huh. Now, certainly that's launched a significant interest in trying to find out how that could be addressed and how it should be addressed. And as I said, standard operating procedure for most line landfills. This includes, NCES, Turnkey, the Lebanon landfill, the Conway landfill, the Nashville landfill, is to collect that leachate and dispose of it at wastewater treatment plants. And by and large, while it's not clear that those plants really are particularly effective in actually treating or destroying the compounds, when you look at it in the context of the total flows to those facilities, we have not seen a situation where the discharges of treated effluent to those facilities, which primarily discharge to surface waters, usually rivers, that they've had an adverse impact on concentrations of PFAS in those receiving streams that causes a cause for concern. Having said that, I don't think anybody thinks that's the best way to manage PFAS, whether it's in leachate or anywhere else. And the reality is those facilities do receive PFAS from their users as well. Each one of those facilities has manufacturing facilities or service industries that discharge wastewater to them, and many of those facilities, also provide or contribute PFAS loading to the influent wastewaters that come into those facilities. An extreme example of that would have been prior to their putting treatment in place, the St. Gobain facility, and the wastewaters that it discharged clearly was, providing PFAS to the influent wastewaters that go to the Nashville treatment plant. So, the Merrimack treatment plant. So this is an issue that we're really working hard on. Right now, the facilities, including NCES, that truck and discharge their leachate to these wastewater treatment plants are doing so lawfully, and the plants that they receive those are receiving those materials lawfully and treating them, and their discharges are lawful. So I don't think anybody thinks it's the best way to manage these materials, but right now it's what we have. One of the things we're going to be looking at in the coming months and weeks ahead, and we've already been looking at, is the possibility for pre-treatment of leachate prior to discharge to a wastewater treatment facility. The Turnkey landfill in Rochester is somewhat unusual in terms of most of the landfills in the United States don't do this, but it happens that for other purposes, the Turnkey landfill was treating a portion of its leachate, pre-treating that before sending it to the Rochester wastewater treatment plant because of another contaminant that was a concern, and Rochester asked them to do that, so they were doing it. So that's something that I think we're going to be looking at, whether that is an appropriate or feasible option for other landfills, including the NCS landfill in the future. At present, it is not a requirement. It is not required under the law or under the rules that they do that. But I think that's an open question that we're going to be working on as we move ahead. So that's a long answer to that, but I think it's worthy of understanding the context. Question 24 reads that Carberry Phase 3 expansion pushes them out to 2048, apparently. Will this be considered in the Stage 6 expansion decision? Any idea when Carberry Phase 3 will begin the permitting process? And the short answer is we don't know that. We don't know when we're going to get a permit until then. We don't know when or if we will get that application from Mount Carberry. When we review an application with respect to the public benefit, as I mentioned earlier on when we were talking about the Dalton proposal, when I talk generally about how we review public benefit, we look at permitted capacity. So to the extent that there's permitted capacity at other landfills in the state that can provide and service the capacity need, we look at that. We do not look at prospective capacity. And then question 25, the mission of DES is to help sustain a high quality of life for all citizens by protecting and restoring the environment and public health in New Hampshire. How can New Hampshire DES help to see that the NCS landfill is closed as opposed to expanded? History shows that the people of Bethlehem do not support the expansion. So, probably not appropriate for me to try to answer that. The answer is, as a permitting authority, we are duty bound to receive and process permit applications and apply the law and the rules to determine whether or not a given permit application is approvable. And then we've had an additional question added, 26. Current lawsuit for violation of the Federal Clean Water Act. Where does DES weigh in on that when considering extension? So the answer is the rules and the law for permitting solid waste facilities require that those facilities be in compliance with applicable other media, if you will, laws and rules. So to the extent that a facility is violating state clean water standards for surface water or groundwater standards, that needs to be considered and addressed when we consider an application. The fact that there is a lawsuit doesn't necessarily weigh into that unless it's our lawsuit and we've asserted something like that. So we would look at the facility compliance with applicable air and water and waste regulations and factor that into our determination on a permit decision. And I see that there are a number of chats that have come in, so I'll try to address those as well. And going back where I left off, I think just going back to where it left off, from John Swan, what would be considered token versus non? And I don't really have an answer for that. I don't have a quantitative answer for that. But we would anticipate that a facility is consistent with the public benefit assertions that were made at the time of their application, that they are continuing to provide that public benefit through their provision of capacity.
No definition.
From Nancy Morrison,
Token.
when I asked Kevin Roy if a township under its zoning ordinances had the authority to deny placing a landfill within its borders, he said yes, because the state knows what's better, or I think that's better for a town than the town does. You said you did not know this, and the court would have to decide. Would you speak to his comment? And I guess, no, I don't have anything to say about what Kevin or anybody else, Kevin Roy or anybody might have said. I think I answered the question that was asked. I don't really have anything more to say about that. And then from John Swan, the point is that neither plant can treat or remove PFAS from the effluent with the outflow going into the Merrimack River. And that, I think I addressed that question. And then from Pam Hoy-Dennison, you had a correction you wanted to make? Oh, okay. Pam, do you want to speak to that? Are you still with us, Pam?
Yeah, yeah, I am. Can you hear me? think there was a point of confusion when you and I were speaking the other, and the information on Mount Carberry Phase 3 is we have received an application for Phase 3A. It's in review for completeness, or it's queued up for review for completeness, and I just wanted to correct that it has come in.
Okay, thank you. So those were the submitted questions, and I think I've reviewed the chats. So I've been talking for a long time here, and if there are other questions, I'm certainly willing. We're all certainly willing to field them.
First, Mike, I'd like to thank you for taking such an extensive amount of time to answer their questions as completely as possible. I think it shows that the agency has always been as transparent as possible. And to take this meeting, to answer your questions as best we can, we appreciate that. Any further type of questions you might have for the department, I'm going to send you back to Tim Drew as a single point of contact. As I mentioned earlier at the opening, that all staff has been directed, unless there's a particular question on an existing permit, to send forward any email that they receive to Tim, and DS will give a unified departmental response. That includes the Air, Water, Waste Division, and the Commissioner's Office. So with that, I'd probably turn it back to Representative Bolton to see if he has any questions or issues that he might want to discuss further.
I do not. It looks like John asked another question in the comment there. We just want to grab that one.
Oh, Pam, do you see that chat regarding Carberry 3A?
That would be sweet.
I do, and I understand. I haven't opened the application or looked at it. I understand that it proposes capacity that would equate with 16 more or less years after 2025. And what that is for airspace, I would have to look it up, go find that information. I don't have it.
Huh.
Thank you. And I do another follow-up question from Fred Anderson saying, back to my initial question, you said that you were not the person to answer that. Where can we get the answer? And the original question was, does the township under its zoning ordinances have the authority to deny placing the landfill within its borders? You know, I think it's a question for an attorney and perhaps in the final analysis for the court. But I don't know where to direct you to get an answer to that, because it's really it's a broad question about how the statute might be interpreted, and in the end of the day, the courts decide that. So I'm sorry. I'll send it back to you.
I'd like to offer the same final wrap-up for Representative Murphy, see if she has any further questions or issues that she would like to bring up at this time. You're on mute. Still on mute.
Representative Murphy, you're still on mute. We can't hear you.
Tim, can you unmute Representative Murphy, please?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. I gotta find her, yeah. Okay.
Great, thank you. I've had a lot of connection issues. Thank you. I've had a lot of connection issues, so but I haven't been able to hear everything that's going on. Thank you to Mr. Wimsatt and everybody for the time that you've spent answering our questions. I don't have anything additional, but I'm certain that down the road that there will be. So at this time, nothing, but thank you.
You're very welcome. Does Annie Ropeek or Robert Beckel have any questions that they'd like to ask? Take silence as a no. Okay. One more chat. Pam, you want to take this one? Question from Sarah Doucette. How can citizens be notified of the applications, submission, and other activity that will affect the permit process?
Thank you, because I couldn't see the question. When an application is filed, abutters, town officials, and other specified parties are notified of the filing. When the application is deemed complete, if it goes for hearing, which in the case of a landfill would be always, the abutters are notified by the applicant, and town officials and all of the parties that were initially notified are made aware of that. We publish a public notice as well. Our information is uploaded regularly to the DES one-stop site where anyone can go and find the information. So as far as general notice to the public of the filing of a landfill application, it is through the normal transparency tools of the agency, again, uploading information to OneStop and through our web pages.
Let's see, another chat came up, and I'll read that for you. Should abutting towns be notified, Whitefield, for instance? Pam, you still with us?
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to process how to answer the question because it could be complex. If the town is an abutter to the property on which the facility was located, they would be handled like an abutter. But if the question is the town in general notified of a landfill application in an abutting town? Not through the application process necessarily.
Okay. And Stephen Walker had one more. Has there ever been a time when DS denied an application based on public opposition?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. I think the best way to answer that is that we have denied permit applications in the past, and in when we deny a permit application, it is because we've determined that the application or the facility being proposed does not meet the requirements of the law and the rules that govern that. That's our job. That's how we are to do it. And when you read the section of the rules that tells us how to go about denying an application, that's what it directs the agency to do, is to determine if we're to find that application must be denied, we have to say how and why it doesn't comply with the rules. Having said that, when we have, or even just conceptually, we may deny an application as a result of determining that it doesn't meet the rules because of information that the public has provided to us to draw our attention to that. So to say, would we deny an application solely because there's public opposition? I don't believe the rules give us the ability to do that. But certainly to the extent that there is public opposition and the comments received by that opposing public draw to our attention areas where the facility cannot or will not comply with the rules, that may form the basis for a denial. So that's, I guess, the best way that I could answer that question.
Thank you, Mike.
No more chat.
John, this is Pam again.
Go ahead, Pam.
John, if I can inject myself, this is Pam again. In hindsight, it probably wasn't as clear as I should have been. The notification of an application in the public hearing process and so on is through publication in local and state newspapers. It goes on the website. We release through the state's MuniLink system, which notifies towns of what is going on at DES. So it wasn't as simple as what I said. I was focused on answering the question about who exactly was notified custom-wise, but there are statewide and regional notifications that we make, that we have an application that's up for public comment.
Okay, thank you for that, Pam. Sarah Doucette had a quick chat. We have about 10 minutes left on our time. This would be the case, re-notifying butters, no notification to town, even in a town that will experience the brunt of traffic like Whitefield. So it seems like the concern is Whitefield may or may not be notified about a landfill, but will experience brunt of traffic. I think Mike answered the traffic issue, but Mike, you might want to clarify that.
So I think Pam answered the question about, I think the simple answer is that the rules and the law don't explicitly require that nearby or neighboring town be officially notified of an application. Having said that, our experience with landfill expansions and proposals is that we all get very good and wide coverage from it's like Annie Ropeek and Robert Bleckel that we have on the call today. So my expectation would be those towns would be well aware, well in advance of any opportunity to provide public comment. Keep it, when we get an application, our primary charge in the first instance is to make sure that we comply with the law and the rules with respect to the receipt of that application. And to the extent the law and the rules require that certain parties be notified, we make sure that the applicant does that, or that if we're required to make the notice, we make sure that we do it. We also have a record, I think, of in many cases, if we do something that's, we extend a comment period or something like that, we may notify a larger group of people of that if we know they have interest. I think the distinction Pam was drawing was whether or not there was a legal requirement to actually notify those neighboring towns. And I think the short answer to that is no.
I don't see any more chats. If anyone has any closing remarks, feel free to unmute yourself. And we have about 7 minutes left of time.
This is Representative Bolden. I don't have any other questions, and it doesn't look like anyone else does. Thank you so much for providing the opportunity to ask these questions, and I appreciate your responses. And obviously, we've got a lot of stuff to continue to research, and we look forward to the public hearings when they come.
We certainly welcome the public comments and take all the comments, respond to them. So the more we have interest from the public, I think the better situation we have overall. But we have to work what's on the record. So please, if you have comments, make it on the public record, or send a letter in with your comments during the comment period.
And this is Mike Wimsatt. I just want to thank everybody for participating today, and hope that, as you see on this, I certainly encourage you, as John has said, to, fully participate in the public, process that will be unfolding here for the Bethlehem application.
All right, with that, we'll close the meeting, and thank you all for your participation.